Yeah, I do it on purpose to build the suspense, guys. That's why I'm late all the time. You know, it's like, when is he coming? When's he coming? It's gonna make the show be even better. No, just kidding. I'm not a prick like that. There was a new girl at the pharmacy. He's really busy today in town, so I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off. I literally just ran in the door. So I sent James Snapp the link. Yeah, you guys are gonna hate me, but I gotta run out to my car and grab something that I left in there. But I'll do that once James gets here. Hopefully he'll be here. I'm not that late. 10 minutes or so. Yeah, so how you doing, guys? Good? Good. Keith's gonna riot. Funny that I wanted Sepp to come to this show. He's like running from Snapp, aren't you, Sepp? Sepp's a King James onlyist, so I want to see if Sepp's around. Sorry, I'm just reading a Skype from Sepp. I told him the other day, I'm like, he comes on the show like every day, right? And he's a King James onlyist, so he's like, I'm like, you better come on tomorrow, and you better not run from Snapp, because I know James Snapp's like a textual criticism expert, and Sepp's a King James onlyist. So I'm like, Sepp, you better come on the show tomorrow. You better not run from Snapp. And he sent me a Skype. He's like, he's a Mason, LOL. And he said, no, but really, I have a dentist appointment at 2, so I don't know how long. The old dentist appointment one, eh, Sepp? Yeah, J-Man, I know you do, but that's just for the sake of the Hebrew Israelites. That's because that's all they use. I'm not a King James onlyist either. I just, I love the King James. I just don't think it's the most accurate translation that we have in 2021, that's all. I don't think it's like the only inspired version, and like most KJV-onlyists think it's like the only inspired version, and it's the only Bible that has the truth, and all the other versions are corrupted. That's it, no matter what, because Kent Hovind told them. There's no evidence to back that up, but that's just what they believe. I don't know. I'm waiting for James Snapp to come in right now, guys. So he's a pretty professional dude, and he likes to keep the format. And I don't know if he forgot about our show. I'm going to try and get a hold of him on Facebook. Yeah, so if he doesn't show up, then we have no show tonight, so that would be terrible. But he's never missed a show ever in his life, so then again, I've never been late for a show in my life with him, so, but I was only 10 minutes late. You don't think that would make him cancel? Hopefully not. Yeah, we can have a show, but it's got to be, I don't know. I'm not a textual criticism expert. Like, if anyone else is, then please come on. But if anyone's up on textual criticism at James Snapp's level, come on the show, and we can have a show on the subject. I'm hoping he'll be here. He's never missed a show ever, so hopefully nothing is wrong at this point. I'm almost worried. because he's a very punctual person. If he says he's going to do a show, like, he does the show. So it's weird, really weird for him. I've sent him an email. I've sent him a Facebook messenger. Actually, I have his phone number. I don't think I saved it in my contacts though, but it's somewhere in there. It's like the only person from Indiana that ever calls me. I'm gonna scroll through like way down back in time. Look for an Indiana number. Come on, how far back does she go? He's got to be in here somewhere. I really got to start saving contacts. I don't know why. I have Kent Hovine's phone number in here somewhere, I think. Talked to him a couple times, but I just don't save numbers. I'm like a reject. I'm a reject. Sorry, guys. He's in here somewhere. He's the only person that's ever called me from Indiana, so I just gotta find it. Maybe it's not here anymore. Oh, man. Arkansas? No, he's not from Arkansas. That must be someone else. Man. J-Man, you want to come on and talk or something, bro? I don't want this show to be rude. You can talk about anything you want. I don't want it to be a big waste of time. Save my show, J-Man, please. Come on, James, where are you? Sorry, guys, this has never happened to him before. Maybe something really, really serious came up. Like, that happens in life sometimes, so hopefully everything is okay with him and his family, because it's not like him to do this. Even if I was like 10 minutes late, like I was, I would still have emails from him going, "Are you going to send me a link? Are we going to start?" And I just like had nothing from him. It's really, really unlike him. If J-Man doesn't want to come on, it's fine. He doesn't have to come on. I mean, I'd like him to come on, but he doesn't have to. Okay, well, if anyone wants to come on the show and discuss Bible translations, I mean, I guess I'll put a link up there. Hopefully James will show up or something eventually. Put my email up. Oh, I got it. I got a message from James. Sweet. James Snap. Nice. Saved the show. Nice. Okay. Sweet. We can do this now. Awesome. I was worried. Yeah, that sounds kind of interesting, TX. We could probably do something like that. But James Snap is on the way. Here he is, right here. Nice. Hey, James, how you doing, bro? I was worried about you.
Doing all right.
I thought something bad might have happened to you. Okay, that's good. I guess maybe it was my fault for being 10 minutes late, but we're punctual guys, so I'm like, uh-oh, hopefully he's okay. Cool, man. Thank you so much for coming. So, yeah, bro, how are you? I guess we're all human. Maybe we just forget about things. I was 10 minutes late, so that's good. Thank you for coming, James. You saved the show. I thought I had to cancel. I don't really know anyone that's up to your level personally on textual criticism, so I was like, I was asking the chat, does anyone up to his level that wants to come talk about textual criticism? I was like, but that's awesome that I got a hold of you. So, you remember the title of the show was The Most Accurate Bible Translation Today, and why you... And I was wondering, like, how you come across that information, or what you personally would think would be the best Bible translation today, and why that is.
Well, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. Hold on, you could approach it. One way would be to say, what is the best? What translation translates the best base text? And then another way to ask it would be, what translation does the best job of translating the text that it uses as the base text?
And what's the base text? What do you mean? Like the manuscript?
Well, that's a good question. What the base text is the text that's being translated. In other words, what is the Greek text? And I'm going to be focusing mainly on the New Testament, because that's okay. my area that I like to focus on.
So you're talking
the New
about
Testament text would be the Greek text.
Okay. So you're talking about the language, like either Koine Greek or Hebrew? Is that what you mean?
Yes, in the case of the New Testament, it'd be Greek.
Yeah. Okay, cool, man.
So if a translation is of the New Testament is a translation of the... If a translation is that... I think we have some... lag.
Yeah, I think we do have a little bit of lag here. I'm just making sure nothing is running on my computer that doesn't need to be running in the background. Maybe you could do the same if you have Facebook, YouTube, anything like that open. Just close it as well, and should be okay. I just closed. I had Facebook.
Got one upload that I had started like several hours ago, but I can't just close out of that because then I would have to.
That's okay. You can't pause it or anything. There's no pause option.
That's the only thing. I think we'll be okay.
Yeah.
Just bear in mind, if I start a sentence, I'll keep on finishing it, even if I see it's still talking.
Sometimes if you stop your camera, stop.
Here we have So one way to define what is the best translation is to say what translation out there translates the best text. that's one way to approach it. And then the other way, even if translators are translating a very good, accurate base text, it's still possible to do a lousy translation by using a method of translation that is too strict or too loose. When I define the word too strict, I mean basically too wooden, a translation that doesn't take idioms into account and ends up producing something that is nonsensical except to specialists in the language that is being translated out of. So for instance, often in the Old Testament, we hear the phrase "the heart," and we might, if we were doing it literally, it might not say heart; it might say something like kidneys. But when so we have to take into account what is going to make sense to the people reading that are intended to read the translation as a translation. When we don't want to translate Greek terms in a context of would Jesus be called, just to raise one example, Jesus, where he was in history, most of the Hebrews around him would probably refer to him by a Hebrew name. And there are some translations today that when they translate the Greek term Jesus, even though that's what's in their text, they will render it as a Hebrew name, just for the sake of emphasizing that historical context. But the text itself, the Greek text, is plainly just referring to the same person, Jesus. And so there's really no point in making it more obscure to the modern day reader. Part of the reason for translation is that you shouldn't need a translation of a translation. Now, there are some terms in every Bible that represent Greek terms in their context that will need explanations. For instance, we talk about units of money, units of distance. The ancient standards there are not in use today. We don't usually use stadia today. So it's not very helpful to have a translation that says stadia. On the other hand, for instance, in Revelation, sometimes you do have measurements given in the text that the precise amount of stadia or of units being measured does have a certain significance that you can't quite catch with just any number. So when there's that significance, that's important for a translation to bring out. So in the Old Testament, for instance, where we have units of how many shekels are involved, or in the New Testament we have how many Roman miles are involved, they're not going to be the same as what we think of today. So usually when it comes to units of measure, that's one area where a translation can take some variance. And if a translation is very, very formal, it will tend to take those measurements seriously and literally and say something that really matches up very closely with the base text. Whereas a more loose translation might render into, say, if it's intended for Americans, it might just say how many dollars and cents are involved. And so you would on one hand, the loose translation is easier to understand, but on the other hand, the formal translation in those cases would be a lot easier to match up with the actual ancient unit. Usually in those cases, sometimes a compromise can be made, in which case the translation in the main text might say what the ordinary person would understand, like dollars, but also have a footnote that says, but literally, it's this many units of this measurement. So that's one way that translation can go about it. But that one instance, the use of how does the translation translate units of currency or units of monetary value, you can generally tell by looking at those passages whether the translation is going to tend to be loose as a whole or formal as a whole. So those two questions will be the main things to look at when we're asking what is it translated from. Is it translation from an accurate text? And then what method is the translator are the translators using? Is it a loose method of translation, or is it a formal method of translation? Now, on the basis of those two questions, I would say that probably one of the most accurate translations out there is the EOB New Testament. This is not a major translation. I don't think you're likely to find this in the top 10, but it was written by Greek Orthodox scholars, and they did a very good job not in the presentation of it. And it's intended to be used in church. It's to be used also in private devotions. And it has various study helps along with the text of the New Testament. It has occasionally icons. It has the footnotes are quite detailed. And when it comes to the base text, in very, very many cases, far more than the New King James, it has footnotes pointing out where there are translational differences.
James, what did you say that translation
I would say of all the versions that are out there, as far as overall accuracy, I would say this one is probably a top contender.
What is it called?
So there is an answer in concrete terms. You can also consider different texts have been used for different base text. This is called the I'll just hold it up. The EOB New Testament, Eastern Orthodox Bible.
Oh, the EOB.
The Eastern Orthodox Bible. Here is the Eastern Orthodox New Testament.
Okay, cool. And what you know how they talk about different manuscript lines, like the Byzantine.
Very nice binding.
They talk about the Alexandrian manuscripts, the Byzantine
very
manuscripts.
Well presented. I just wish there were more of them. It's a relatively new version. Yes, the EOB.
The lag is so bad, you guys.
So
it's
if
terrible.
You can find this online, I think that the one of the main publishers is called New Rome Press.
There's like a 20-second delay that everything I say, it takes like 20 seconds for him to get.
The Byzantine text. In this version, the EOB New Testament, I'll keep talking because we can't line up for the lag yet. But the EOB New Testament is probably the best.
Try stopping your camera.
The EOB New Testament, I would say overall, is the best translation out there. But it's not a very popular translation. Of the popular translations, you also have one that was recently issued by a group of Lutherans called the Evangelical Standard Version. I guess you can. No, excuse me. Back that up. Evangelical Heritage Translation, EHV, and that's popular enough to be accessible at Bible Gateway and places like that.
Yeah, I found the EOB.
I would say those was some of the top two. Now, whereas the EOB is very consistently Byzantine in its base text, but it doesn't have in it some of the minority readings that you find in the King James. The EOB is a little more consistent when it comes to following the majority readings. But there are also some cases where I would say even that base text though is not fully. Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, there's some places where the EOB's base text, even though I think it's a lot better than the base text of a lot of other versions, it still has some flaws. So you would want to get a supplement version, a backup version. But also the EOB Advantage has those footnotes. The textual footnotes are phrased and presented a lot more responsibly than what you have in versions like the ESB, the NASB. They're much more thorough. There's a lot more of them, but also they're not shy about describing the evidence a little bit more precisely, including patristic evidence, which I don't think the ESB, the NIV, other such versions ever use in any of the footnotes in the normal editions of those versions. So the EOB, I would say, has definite advantages to it that many other versions simply do not have. From a text critical perspective, even though a person might disagree with many of the calls that were made in deciding what the base text was, because the footnotes are so thorough, it has definitely great advantages over probably any other version out there.
God.
So I think that. So if you're asking on a simple level of all the versions out there, which one is the best? Right now, I would say it's the EOB. Although it would probably be best to say that 5 or 10 years later, when it becomes more accessible, God willing. I think for this,
I found it
holding from New Rome Press. I think that they don't have very many editions. This is one of the few editions they have of the New Testament for $40, but it's very well made.
If you type EOB in online, it comes up. I was typing EOV with a V. I was mistaking it. It's EOB, so I found it. And James, if you turn off your camera and just leave your microphone on, it helps with your bandwidth sometimes. That might help. You should see a setting somewhere on the screen that says stop camera, and you just push it. Might help with the lag. Say something to me, bro.
Do you have any other questions or related questions?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Did that help with the delay?
Oh. Okay.
Hey, Sepp, how you doing?
What's going on, Nick? Hello, Mr. James, Mr. Snapp.
I know people. I'm going to start adding people on to come into the conversation, but Sepp is kind of like my co-host, so no hard feelings if I'm not just like adding a bunch of people to the show.
We'll try to try to get that leg back in sync with
I don't
know. For a while. We'll turn it back on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Sepp. He's got like a 20-second delay.
I'm not sensing any lag right now. Your mouth is moving in sync with the.
Okay. So hey, now that Sepp is here,
doing well.
What do you say to people, James, that say the King James Bible is the most accurate translation we have now?
Oh man, I gotta go. All right, I'll be back. It's okay. Yeah, Mr. Snapp, I had just logged on right now, and I missed the majority of what you were talking about. I caught maybe the end of it, how you were talking the ELV, maybe. I think that's
EOB.
Okay.
My name
that would probably be the most reliable for the English-speaking world, right?
That's what he was saying. The EOB.
The ELV.
He has like a 20-second delay, bro. He's got a bad lag going on. He doesn't hear what we say for like 20 seconds after.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's really, really hard to work with.
Well, has he tried refreshing?
I'm sorry, Nick, were you asking me that question?
James, I'm asking you. Can you hear me? Oh. I'm asking you, James.
I would generally say, even though there are some readings where I would pick a different reading, the base text, it's a very well-made translation, the EOB.
What I'm asking you, James, is what do you say to people that say the King James Bible is the most accurate translation that we have to?
I can hear you, yes.
It's such a bad delay, bro. Just wait. He'll get the question.
Right.
If it wasn't James Snapp, I wouldn't even work with it, but I respect this guy a lot.
Please continue.
No, yeah, his credentials are definitely worth noting.
It's worth dealing with the delay. If it was anyone else, I'd be like, well, we got to try again because the delay's too bad, but I love talking to this guy. So I'm sorry, guys in the audience, but we're dealing with it as best as we can. I'm going to try again. Mr. Snapp.
I would say it is accurate as a translation of its base text.
Okay, I didn't really get that answer.
He said it's accurate. That's the end of it.
It's a good translation of the base text that it has.
Right.
It's a good translation of the base text that it has.
Like what's available, he means, I'm assuming.
But that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm asking you, James. Like, there's, in your opinion,
yes, I can hear you fine. Yes.
Well, in your opinion, we have newer translations that do a better job of translating or giving us more information, right? Because there's been more manuscript finds that go back further and stuff like that. Correct? Am I correct?
No, it's much more than that. I would say, as a translation of its base text, the King James is pretty good. But it is about 400 years old, so there's some verbiage in there that the average reader of the King James isn't going to quite grasp. It's almost like you need a translation of the translation at some points.
Okay.
The locks of the King Bible itself, it's a lot easier to use the translation if you do not misunderstand it, if you are aware of that antiquated language and take steps to compensate for that. But that's not really a problem in the King James. The problem is that most people just don't know the old language that was used.
Well, James,
I told you, Nick.
Correctly compensated for. Then there's
cool,
a second question, which is how accurate is?
Did I know Desiderius Erasmus, though he had to
Nick,
he wrote. Yeah, I'm still here. I know there's a bad delay, but I know Desiderius Erasmus, who compiled the King James. I know he wrote letters to his friend Bombasius in Rome at the Vatican at the time, because there was certain manuscripts that Erasmus didn't have, and he had to directly borrow verses out of the Latin Vulgate and put it into the King James.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah, like and
Those
subscribe.
are rare exceptions. Normally Erasmus used the Greek text that he compiled there at the city of Basel. A printer named Probin wanted to make a new Greek text. The Complutensian Polyglot. Probin had already heard that it was underway in Spain, and he thought, well, that might be a good project, a good enterprise that I could do. And so he basically talked to Eusebius, who had been working on Bible manuscripts for years. Eusebius had seen a lot more manuscripts than he had access to directly at the time. He had seen manuscripts in various locations where he had been. He had also seen a manuscript in Britain. He had studied manuscripts all over the place. So when he went to Basel, even before his time at Basel, when he sat down and began making his compilation, Erasmus already had probably more knowledge about Bible manuscripts than anybody else on the planet at the time. There might have been a few contenders besides Erasmus, but he would definitely be on the top row, so to speak. But when he sat down at Basel, the only manuscripts that he knew he had were minuscules. He did not have the ancient manuscripts, what we would think of as the ancient manuscripts, the uncials. Sinaiticus had not been discovered yet. Vaticanus, he did not have much access to. Now he was aware of Vaticanus. He knew of its existence, and like you had mentioned, at one point he wrote to the librarian custodian at Rome and asked for, and the custodian wrote back to him and gave him 365 samples of readings in Vaticanus that tended to support the reading of the Vulgate, because by the time of Erasmus, this question was beginning to be pressed of, should we follow the Greek or should we follow the Latin? And 100 years later, in 1582, the Reims New Testament was published, which was based on the Latin. But one of the things that Erasmus was trying to convince people of was you should follow the Greek text, not the Latin text. You should follow the sources. In other words, back to the sources, ad fontes. And that was Erasmus's big push. And that was part of the thing, part of his motivation, not only to make a Greek text, but also to show beside it a Latin paraphrase of the Greek, which, besides presenting a Latin paraphrase of the Greek, would also point out where the Latin that was widely in use at the time of Erasmus, where that fell short of really saying the meaning of the original Greek text, which showed the value of getting back to the sources. So Erasmus didn't compile his first Greek New Testament just for the sake of providing a Greek New Testament, but also to contribute to the second question of why can't we just keep on using the Latin? Because Erasmus was trying to show people that's not really always the same thing as using the meaning of the Greek text, because sometimes the Latin Vulgate did not transmit the meaning of the Greek text, at least certainly not as well as what he was compiling did.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, like he also said, besides having those 365 readings from Vaticanus, Erasmus had some other insights about it, but those were at minor points. I don't think Erasmus actually adopted a single one of those readings, except in the book of Acts, when it comes to the name of the island in Acts 27, whether it was Clauda or Cauda.
What about the Comma Johanneum, James? What about the
minimal, practically indiscernible effect on the actual content of Erasmus's compilation?
What about the Comma Johanneum?
Yes?
In the King James, how it's not found in any other translation, and apparently there's no manuscripts really to support it until the 12th century.
The last I heard you say that's what you're saying.
The Comma Johanneum in the King James, it's not found in any other translation. I was asking about that, and I've heard from credible sources that there isn't really any manuscripts to back it up until like the 12th century. Yeah, 1 John 5:7. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. If you go to the website CurtisvilleCC.com and look into the textual criticism resources I have there, I have several
that's your website
about Comma Johanneum, and I think it shows pretty clearly that the Comma Johanneum originated in Latin. It didn't originate as part of the Greek text.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's not original, but
Yes.
It's in the King James. So that's why I'm saying, like, if you're a King James onlyist and you think like there's people that believe the King James is truly the only inspired word of God, and the other translations are.
In this, it has 1 John 5:7 in the text, but there's also an extensive footnote pointing out this is an interpolation. The reason how we can discern that it's an interpolation, CurtisvilleCC.com. Look for the textual criticism resources, and just scroll down the buttons until you find one. 1 John 5:7, and
So the point I was trying to make is the people who translate the King James.
I've got a lot to say about that.
The King James translators would have loved to have the wealth of knowledge and manuscript evidence that we have nowadays. When
Erasmus made his first edition, he did not include what's now known as the Comma Johanneum, and also in his second edition, he did not include the Comma Johanneum. Now, before he made his third edition, Martin Luther got hold of one of those earlier editions and began to translate it into German. So the German history of the Comma Johanneum is not going to be the same as the English history of it.
Sepp, what we're talking about, right?
It
sounds like
in 1519 and so, there were some critics who said, one named Lee.
It even kind of sounds like it's added in to prove the Trinity. Like, that's why I would never use this verse against a non-Trinitarian to try and prove the Trinity, because like most people know that 1 John 5:7, for there are three that bear witness in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, that these three are one.
Make the best of it with the lag. But Erasmus initially did not have any manuscripts of 1 John that had the Comma Johanneum. and he was challenged on not having the Comma Johanneum in the text of his compilation after the first and second edition. And he said, "This part of and by the way, this part of the historical account is often misrepresented. Bruce Metzger, for years and years, Bruce Metzger had misrepresented the history of what had happened. Metzger said that Erasmus had made a rash promise and promised if I had. No, if you could show me one single manuscript, I would. If I had one manuscript that had it, it would have included it. And he promised that he would include it. This was what Metzger was saying. Metzger was saying that he had promised, bring me a manuscript that has it, and I'll put it in the next edition. That's not really what happened. Metzger kind of made a correction in the third edition of the text of the New Testament. If you look in the footnotes that he has way in the back, like Metzger did not make it easy to see when he retracted his story. But if you look in the back very carefully, go from page 101, where he says, see also page 291, note 2. Well, we need to page 291 note 2. Erasmus admits that what he says in the text of the text of the New Testament was bogus. He just didn't really make a broad broadcast about the mistake that he had made.
That's why you don't find
if you turn to page 291 in Metzger and look down to the bottom, we can see Metzger's admission that De Jong, another scholar, showed that Metzger was incorrect, that Metzger had misrepresented the course of events. And what Metzger says in his admission is, what is said on page 101 about Erasmus's promise to include the Comma Johanneum if one Greek manuscript were found that contained it, and a subsequent suspicion that manuscript 61 was written expressly to force him to do so, needs to be corrected in light of the research of H.J. De Jong. That's Jonge, a specialist in Erasmus studies who finds no explicit evidence that supports this frequently made assertion. But you can see, if you put yourself in Erasmus's shoes. Well, it is in some other versions. I just pointed out it's in this one, but there's also a note explaining that it's in interpolation. But first, let's get a grasp of what really happened and how the Comma Johanneum ended up in Erasmus's third edition. What happened?
I'm not
is
trying to
he had
say
said,
the King James is bad or anything, Sep. I'm just trying to break you out of the King James only.
And this is what really happened. When he was defending himself from a critic who had said that he'd been negligent in his research, and
by withholding the one manuscript that was found.
Did not take to that accusation easily, and said, "How can you accuse me of negligence when it simply was not in my manuscripts? If I had a single manuscript that included it, I would have included it. But I didn't have such a manuscript. So how can you accuse me of negligence?" That's what that was the gist of what Erasmus had said. Well,
plus,
when it came time for him to make his
400 something years
third
old,
edition in 1522, before that time, this manuscript, Codex 61, had been found that included the Codex Johanneum, and that was Erasmus was made aware of it, and his actions magically valid. That doesn't mean that Erasmus's decision was the right decision. What matters is, was the Comma Johanneum original or was it not original? That should be the question that we look at. Even though historically what happened with Erasmus's text might be historically interesting, those things don't really decide the question of whether it should be there or not. Now, the King James and the New King James, they also include it. But when you look into the details of the Greek manuscripts, it's not too hard to see that it started out in the African Old Latin transmission line. That's why it's almost unheard of in the Greek transmission line. Of all the copies we have of First John in Greek, it's only in a very small handful, and usually you can see in that handful that they're all copies that have been influenced in one way or another by Latin copies.
Well, when you read it, man,
sometimes
like
there
you just
were
read
Greek
Comma Johanneum alone,
Latin
it sounds
manuscripts in which sometimes people would just take the Latin, and when there was a gap in the Latin, they would just translate the Latin into Greek and put it in.
Just reading it, it sounds like some
what we have in the
13th century added in to prove the Trinity.
Also, there are some manuscripts that have it, but somebody has just written it in the margin.
Yeah, like you can tell because there's no other verse in the whole Bible.
Let me sneak into the library for a day and a half, and we can have
clear.
20 or 30 or 40 more manuscripts that will have it.
So hard,
but that doesn't make it valid. And likewise, when we look at the manuscripts that have it, and we see all this Latin influence in them, it's not too hard to see where it came from. It came, it was kind of smuggled into those few.
James has a bad lag. I just muted him for a sec so you guys can hear me clearly. But yeah, if you guys go read the Comma Johanneum, 1 John 5:7, you only find it in the King James or New King James. It sounds like, I'm a Trinitarian myself, don't get me wrong, but like it just sounds like some monk wrote it in the 13th century. Like there's no other verse that comes close anywhere in the Bible to even explain the Trinity in that detail. Like, you know what I mean? I believe in the Trinity, but it just sounds to me like someone wrote it, and that's why we don't find it in any manuscripts before the 13th century. Like James was saying, like it's like, what is it? There are three that bear witness in heaven: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. It's just it's too good for a Trinitarian. You know what I mean? Like it's just, you know. Are you there, James?
Maybe it's the lag still.
Yeah, it sucks, man. I like talking to him a lot.
Oh, there he goes.
So, Sepp, what's up, bro? You can weigh in now.
I'm here to call you out for blasphemy. Nah, dude, like I had said beforehand, I really do hinge on the original Greek text beforehand. Kind of what it's awesome that James Snapp is voicing that again.
Let me try to turn my camera back on and see if that.
I just want you to become not a King James onlyist, Sepp.
Can you see me
in your mind? Yeah, I can see you, bro. Like I love the King James too, Sepp, but like I'm not a King James onlyist. Like there's been so many discoveries and discoveries in the Greek language that we've learned about in the last 400 and something years. Like our knowledge has evolved. Like our everything has evolved. Like you can't just stick with a translation of the Bible that's like 400 and something years old and say we've learned nothing new since then and there's no mistakes in it at all. Like, you know, I just gotta expand your mind, bro. Nothing wrong with the King James, but like.
No, I mean, James Snapp kind of voiced the same thing. He said there's nothing wrong with it. The only thing that could be really wrong with it, if I'm not mistaken in quoting you, Mr. Snapp, is that people could misunderstand the verbiage, the actual meanings of the words used, right? So.
Yeah, and there's the odd verse like the Comma Johanneum that's added in kind of thing. They have evidence for it, and it's a beautiful translation, but I just don't understand the point of being a King James onlyist. Like saying,
well, I mean, the reason I personally stick with the King James is because of the definite, like the talking points of people. Like you know who is being spoken to, and what is exactly being said.
I don't think I ever actually said there's nothing wrong with the King James. There are definitely some things that where the King James.
I love James. He's so funny.
Where there are things wrong.
I didn't say there's nothing wrong with King James. It's like, hold on a sec. Sorry, James. I love you, bro. You're funny. Sorry to cut you off. Keep going.
He was saying the misunderstanding of the verbiage or something like that people.
He was like, no, you said. He's like, He's like, hold on. I didn't say there was nothing wrong with the King James.
Nick,
yeah.
If the other person felt that I had said that there's nothing wrong with the King James, then I'm being misunderstood because
I know,
there are
bro.
definitely things wrong with the King James.
I'm sorry,
But
Ginger.
but maybe we should I should. We also get this two people talking at once, where it might be best if I shut down and try to come back in 5 minutes. That maybe that will help
Sure.
the connection.
Is there any way you can? Is there no way you can? Yeah, that's cool. But is there any way you can
getting
pause
hard
your
to communicate coherently?
pause your upload that you got going? You can't
That'd be
pause
all
it.
right if I just close down and then come back.
Yeah, come back in, bro. Yeah, try and pause your upload. Pause it. That was so funny, Seth. He's like, "Whoa, hold on, Nick." I love that guy.
I'm looking at the video, so I guess he'll clarify when he comes back.
I know. I just like the way he is. He's so like.
No, that's cool, man. And like I've said before, everyone that's watching, obviously, I don't know everything, right?
I'm not
And
laughing because I'm not Seth, I'm not laughing at you, or I'm not laughing anything to do with the King James. I'm just laughing at his personality and the way he is, right?
No, dude, if you have the knowledge, right, and you're not going to speak up about what you know is facts or not, then it's like deceitful to people.
He's like an open book.
Deceitful, you know, to
he
him.
Says what's on his mind. I
right.
just really like the guy. He's an awesome guy. He runs a church and everything. And he's a pastor. He's a good guy. I just think it's funny the way he is. But like, you guys gotta like, when I first kind of met him, I didn't really know about, like, you know, they say people that are on the level of genius are like, they kind of look like they're mentally, like, sometimes they look like they're not very smart, or they sound like, you know, but like, when I first met him, like, he talked kind of fast and it's hard to hear him, and he kind of, you know, and I'm like, who is this guy? But then, like, I actually like slowed down and listened to his words, and I'm like, wow, this guy's brilliant, dude. And I went to like his website and his channel, and I checked out like all the work he's been doing his whole life and everything he knows about textual criticism and like ancient manuscripts. And I was like, oh, every single thing he said was on the money. When I watched the video, I'm like, wow. Hey, James.
Hey, Nick.
Oh, that sounds better. It looks better. What did you do, man? Did you say some prayers or something? You're a magician, aren't you?
Well, no, that's my dad. But
it's better now. It's like fixed. Wow.
Okay, yeah. So I guess I misunderstood what you were saying with the lag. But it was something about along the lines.
That's understandable.
Yeah. So it was about the lines of people not being able to understand the verbiage of the King James. That's kind of where I got left off hearing what you were explaining about the King James Bible.
Yes. As I was explaining what makes a translation better than another translation. One way the translation can be better than another translation is how accurate its base text has been compiled, as opposed to some base text that's compiled very badly.
So the base text is just the language it's written in, or is it the specific manuscript it's compiled from?
The base text is the Greek text, in the case of the New Testament, the Greek text that's being translated, where the English text comes from.
So it depends on the manuscript, right? Like Byzantine, Alexandrian, right? Does that have a bearing to you?
Yeah, most definitely. To a great extent, most of our manuscripts reflect the Byzantine transmission line. Now, they don't all do it in the same way. Obviously, there are variations that any two manuscripts will have. But when it comes to what compilation is used, most translations that are being made today, like the most major translations, like the NIV, the ESV, the CSB, most of those are being drawn from. I mean, the English doesn't pop out of nowhere. It's based on a Greek text, and the Greek text that they tend to favor is the Nestle-Aland Novum Testamentum. This is the base text of for all practical purposes, the ESV. Now, if you look in the preludes, the introductions to the translations, they'll usually say this openly, that the Nestle Aland text is their base text.
And I just
Right.
want to clarify for everyone that some new translations are garbage. I do not like all the new translations out there. Like, look at the ones that the Jehovah's Witnesses use. Like, there's some whacked out new translations. Like, what is it, the New Living Testament or something? Like, I'm not like agreeing with like every single new translation. I just want to, because I see some people in the audience talking about stuff like that. Right?
So I can cancel my Amazon order right now.
Yeah.
I just ordered like a bunch of new translations.
I personally like the ESV, the NASB, and the King James. And I'm going to check out the EOB now that you told me about that, James.
Well, Mr. Snap. So my, I guess the question to you would be, what translations, if you can give maybe 3 that are, very sound in the way that they're found in their original text, the way that they're translated, what 3 translations would you recommend for, not just a new believer, but someone that does want to get a more accurate description of the text?
And I want to know why, James. Like, how early back do these I want to know, like, as close as I can get back to the original authors. That's what I'm interested in. So, like, what are the earliest manuscripts? Like, these translations that you're going to recommend to us, like, what's the evidence for them? Like, how early manuscripts do they go back? Like, what family of manuscripts? Could you explain that if you have time?
Sure.
Thank you.
The manuscripts that Erasmus used in making the King James were relatively young manuscripts. But one manuscript that he used, Codex #1, happened to be a member of a small cluster of manuscripts, a very famous cluster that was dated in the late 1800s and early 1900s, which was called the Lake family at first because the man that gave it a lot of attention was Cursop Lake. There was also the Farrar group, which came to be known as Family 13. These 2 clusters of manuscripts have tend to be considered much more significant because they vary to quite an extent from the Byzantine manuscripts. Even though they often agree with the Byzantine text, they also have enough disagreements to recognize them as having a different transmission line.
You said the Farrar group, and
Farrar.
what was it?
Yes,
and what was the other one? What was the other one?
It was first called the Lake group, but now it's generally just called Family 1.
Family 1 and Farrar. Why are they named after people that discovered them or something?
They're named after people that analyzed them.
Farrar and Family 1, and these
Farrar.
are
There's no D at the end.
Farrar.
Textual apparatus for Family 13 and Family 1, they're the same thing.
I need to be writing this stuff down, man. Otherwise, I forget. So I'm gonna open up my notepad. Like, this is crucial knowledge that I want to learn. You guys, you can't really learn this stuff for free. The stuff that James is teaching you, this is like college course material stuff.
Well, I would just like to personally thank you too, Mr. Snap, for taking time out of your day and being able to help us understand this, because this is actually something that I've come across quite a bit with people, almost to the point where they want to give up on the Bible because they're saying to themselves, "Where is the Word of God? How can I trust something that's been rewritten countless times?"
Family 1 manuscripts and Farrar. How do you spell Farrar? Do you know, James?
Either Farrar or Ferrar.
Okay, Farr. I'll Google
I
Farr.
call it Family 13. So.
Oh, what about? I thought you said there was 2 groups. There was
Family 1 is Family 1.
Oh, and then Family 13. Okay, I got you.
Lake analyzed.
Farrar, also known as Family 13, right?
Yeah. Okay. But if you go to Robert Walsh's website, the encyclopedia, technically it's a website based on the Encyclopedia of New Testament Textual Criticism. He has these things all organized into a nice list with kind of like, just what the name suggests, an encyclopedia of textual criticism. So in just a day's worth of reading, you can find out a whole lot about Family 13 and Family 1.
So those 2 groups of manuscripts were also used in creating the King James?
Not directly. In Family 1, one of its representatives, the one that's named after, Erasmus had that, but he did not use it as much as it could be used. But he did have access to it.
I know we're kind of getting off topic, but Desiderius Erasmus, he's the one that compiled the King James originally?
No. But between the King James in 1611 and Erasmus in 1514, 1516, there's almost 100 years in between. But Erasmus compiled the base text in the early 1500s, and then it went through like five revisions.
He compiled the text that the King James was translated out of?
I'll get there. Okay, let me take it a step at a time.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so pull back the camera and let's get a wide lens view.
Yeah.
Over here.
Fisheye.
We have
fisheye lens, flat earther.
Making his first edition, then his second edition, then his third edition, fourth and fifth edition. Now after the third edition, there were no drastic changes. I think initially he changed quite a few of his readings in Revelation, and he just made just was kind of a little bit of fine tuning, but before the end of the process.
Erasmus?
But things did not just jump to the King James. After Erasmus, and after he had made his initial compilation, then came a second major scholar who was also known as part of a printing family named Stephanus. He's sometimes also called Robert Estienne, but we can just call him Stephanus. Same guy.
Bring up the notepad here.
And there were more than one significant researcher from the family of Stephanus. But in the middle of the 1500s, Stephanus came out with what's known as his kingly or his royal edition, and to this edition he had both verse numbers, which nobody else had that were anything like it, with basically the same verse numbers that are still in use today. They were tweaked a little bit, but it's basically the same verse numbers that we use today in our Bibles. So if anybody says, where did our verse numbers come from? They came from Stephanus. Now, you could look in manuscripts earlier than Stephanus, much earlier, like Codex L, and see the text is divided very similarly.
Codex L.
That's simply because many verses just naturally divide themselves that way.
What year is Codex L from, James?
Codex L is not dated precisely, but it's probably from the 700s.
So about the 8th century?
Yep.
So, yeah, do you know what's cool? The Codex Sinaiticus is, I didn't really know this, but it's the oldest, apparently it's the oldest complete copy of the New Testament that in existence. And it's like in beautiful shape, beautiful condition. Have you seen the original? It's in such good shape. It was made in the 300s in the 4th century, compiled.
Yes, well, I'm pretty familiar with Sinaiticus. I've done several.
Yeah, I bet you are. But I was watching something about it.
But one thing to point out, though, just because a manuscript is old doesn't make its text accurate.
It's still pretty cool, though.
You know, that was actually another question I had, too, about the Alexandrian texts that were found, I want to say...
Hey, I gotta take a bathroom break. If any of you guys want to take like a 5 minute break or 3 minute break or whatever, now would be a good time to do it. If not, it's cool.
But could you expound a little bit on what exactly are the Alexandrian texts and how they were found and a little bit more?
As far as English translations are concerned, back in Erasmus's time, all the way up into the 1800s, it was the default approach to use the Byzantine text. Now, the Textus Receptus is not really a pure representative of the Byzantine text. Erasmus was limited by the manuscripts that were available to him there at the city of Basel in the Dominican library. And some of those manuscripts had readings that did not really dominate the Byzantine transmission line, but they were what Erasmus had, and so that's what got eventually into the Textus Receptus. But I don't want to leave Stephanus hanging. Stephanus, when he did his work, he got Erasmus's work, but he also had access to some manuscripts that Erasmus didn't have. For instance, Codex L that we just mentioned from the 700s, far earlier than the other manuscripts, the minuscule manuscripts at Basel. And there was an unsealed manuscript at Basel, but Erasmus apparently never used it or never even knew of it. So Codex L, though, we can look at it as an old manuscript, a legitimately old manuscript. So if somebody says, well, the King James, that was just made on the basis of young manuscripts, and they try to present this picture as if the King James is based on the young manuscripts, But the ESV and the NIV are based on the old manuscript, so that makes them better, right? That's kind of what the marketers would like to say, would like people to believe.
Right, I've heard that.
Yeah, but the Byzantine manuscript was a very widespread text, if we I don't want to skip the points that I was making about the history of how we get from Erasmus to the King James. So remind me to come back to that, please.
Okay, Erasmus, King James. Okay.
So Erasmus began in the 1520s. Stephanus later on takes kind of the dominant role of compiling the Greek New Testament, and Stephanus makes the Royal third edition that has not only verse numbers but also a textual apparatus. So already we see a list of variant readings in the Greek text. After Stephanus comes along a third scholar named Theodore Beza, who was influential during the Reformation. And Theodore Beza also made his own edition, actually multiple editions of the Greek New Testament text. So by the 1590s, there are quite a few Greek-based texts that you can work from. Now, all during this time, English translations are being made of the text that they have in hand. The Tyndale translation was made. The Geneva Bible was made, for instance. So English translations are already being made before the King James. Mm-hmm. But when the King James comes onto the scene, when James says, "Make me a Bible," the translators of the King James already have access to not only Erasmus's work, but Stephanus's work and Beza's work. Now, Beza, you might recognize the name from Codex D. Codex D, even though 200 years ago most people would say it came from the 600s, nowadays people tend to think that it came from either the early 500s or the 400s. D.C. Parker, a scholar who's done a lot of studies on it, even says it comes from about 400, which makes it only a little bit younger than Codex Sinaiticus.
Okay.
So Codex Beza was a manuscript that was in the possession of Theodore Beza in the 1500s. So if anyone tries to say, "Oh, the King James has how could the scholars back then have known about the older text when they didn't have the older manuscripts?"
Mm-hmm.
Codex L is a pretty old manuscript. Codex D is a pretty old manuscript. But also, the scholars in the 1500s, like Erasmus, they didn't just do manuscript research. They also did patristic research. They were some of the pioneers in the field. And many times they would quote the patristic writers left and right. They didn't have a manuscript, but they had a record of somebody from, say, the 100s or the 200s who was quoting from a manuscript. And so they knew what the readings were in existence in those periods because they have those patristic writings in hand. As long as those patristic writings were not corrupted themselves.
Right.
So those though are, it should not be ignored that the people that made the King James were leaning on the giants that had gone before them. Erasmus was, and it wasn't just a jump from Erasmus with just a few manuscripts of Basil, but it was also Stephanus working with L and Montanus, and then also after him Beza, who had Codex Beza, Codex D from the year 400. So it's not. So the idea that the King James was just based on late manuscripts. If the King James had been made in, say, 1522, you might be able to get away with that. But that's not when it was made. It was made in the early 1600s after not only Erasmus, but also after Stephanus, also after Beza. For all that, there are places in the King James, quite a few, where the later editors, just whatever text they saw, they seem to have thought, and again, I can't read their minds, but they seem to have thought, well, Beza must have known what he's doing. He's a legendary scholar, so we'll just adopt the reading that he got. And some of Erasmus's readings still trickle down into the base text of the King James. Even some of the readings that he retro-translated from Latin, and this wasn't a thing that happened a lot in the King James. I think it happened in the book of Acts, chapters 9, verses 5 through 6. And later on in Revelation, because in Revelation, Erasmus only had one Greek manuscript. There wasn't like there were a lot of copies in Greek of the book of Revelation. just sprinkled around Europe. So for the last 6 verses, Erasmus' manuscript was simply missing material. It was just like this page just hadn't survived. And so Erasmus, to finish the work, he didn't want to just wait around until another manuscript of Revelation happened to show up.
He had to borrow it right from the Latin Vulgate.
Yeah, well, from a particular Latin Vulgate. Well, but for his Greek text, he only had one manuscript, which means that he had to depend on just one source. Yeah. Now, as long as the text was translated, was transmitted accurately by the copyists of that Greek manuscript and by the copyists of all the manuscripts which were its ancestors, that'd be fine. But in real life, the manuscript did have readings that do not represent the majority of the text.
Okay.
And you can say for Revelations, there are not really a Byzantine and a Western and Alexandrian, but it's more like two different branches that you said, not the usual situation.
Okay. So with all this being said, Mr. Snapp, again, I do pose the question to you, with this understanding that you have of the sources and the time frame that these scholars were compiling their work, right? What is today, modern today, the most true to source Bible that we can now read for ourselves? And if there is a multiple source, what are they?
Among English versions?
Yeah, English in particular.
I would say if you had to pick just one, if you were on an island and you could only have one New Testament there, I'd say the EOB should be the one to pick. EOB, Eastern Orthodox. Not because I love everything there is to have about Eastern Orthodox theology, but as a translation, most of the textual variants of any consequence are covered with the footnotes of the EOB. People often say that about the New King James Version, but the EOB does the job a lot more thoroughly.
Okay.
So if there are places where you say, well, wait a minute, I think the Alexandrian text really has the edge here. Well, you would not that would not just drop into non-existence if you use the EOB, because it would still be there in a textual footnote.
Right.
Now also there's a close contender, which is the Evangelical Heritage version, which again is not as popular as you might think yet, but it's still kind of new to the marketplace. But the Evangelical Heritage version is very, very well made, I think, and I think we'll see more of it, God willing, as the market expands.
Cool. So again, people, those are the 2 recommendations for English speaking today. That if you had to choose and you're on an island by yourself, you definitely should consider bringing these 2 books with you, if not just one of them.
Yeah.
Because
one way of looking at it is if you have just the ESV, if you had just the King James, if you had just the New Living Translation, their text would tend to emphasize the base text that they're drawn on. Now, I mentioned that most modern translations are based on the Nestle-Aland. Well, the Nestle-Aland text is almost just like the text that was compiled by Westcott and Hort. Eldon Epp compared the two and said, why are we still using Westcott and Hort's text? We say we've done all these advances in the 1900s, and he was saying this back in the 1970s. We say we like to pretend that we've made all these advances because we have papyri and we have all these older discoveries. Well, Westcott and Hort, when they were working, they didn't really apply any papyrus discoveries because the papyri hadn't been discovered by the time of Westcott and Hort. We've discovered since Westcott and Hort, dozens and dozens of papyri. We also now have the Sinaitic Syriac, which they did not have. We've also got Manuscript Y, which they did not have. Other discoveries, the work on Family 1 has been greatly expanded and enhanced. The work on 1739 in Acts has been greatly expanded. Westcott and Hort did not have those advances in hand in 1881, and yet here we are in for Epp it was 1974. For us, it's 2020, and we're still basically using the same text that Westcott and Hort produced, who had no papyri. Well, there actually was one, but they didn't really use it. And so why is it with all these advances, why are we still basically using the same compilation? Because when you look at Nussel Allen, and when you look at Westcott and Hort from 1881, you can count up how different they are, and they're simply not very different. Maybe I think I calculated it up once, and it was less than 1,000 variants are different from what was in 1881.
Okay. Well, so again, it is the Eastern Greek Orthodox that you were recommending?
In English, the EOB New Testament, and it's I think they only have one or two editions of it, and it's about $40, I think. But
yeah, I'm trying to look it up right now so I could check it out.
Oh, look up New Rome Press. I think it's on their website. I think that's a distributor, or a major distributor at least. But it's I find the font a little small. Most folks would be okay, but as far as the content, I think that both in the formality of the version, I like. I don't like it. I don't like unnecessary paraphrases. Of course, paraphrases necessary sometimes, but no. Metzger initially said no. A translation be as let me. I'm quoting now, so I better get this right. He said a translation should be as literal as I'm going to misquote him, but he said something like a translation should be as literal as possible and as free as necessary. As free as necessary being the key phrase. And I think many times the New Living Translation, I don't use it except to see what's wrong with it, and it's not as free as necessary by far.
Anyway, sorry I've been out of the conversation for so long. I've been talking to the chat. The chat there, it's going pretty. Got some pretty outlandish statements coming in from the chat. But James, you're awesome, bro. I want to know. I want to know personally from you. What do you think the earliest? When do you think the earliest writings about Christ were written? Like you personally, not what we have. I'm not talking about like P52 and all the papyrus from the 2nd century, but when do you think the original Gospels were written? I've heard some theologians and apologists rate them all the way because they say, I think it was what was the earliest Gospel, Mark or Matthew? They say they were talking about the temple was still standing in one of those Gospels, so like there's no way it could be older than some people. Like William Lane Craig was like putting early dates of like 30 years on some of the Gospels, 30 years after Jesus died. What do you think about that?
There was probably in the hands of Mark a collection of Peter's remembrances about Christ. Peter didn't stay in Judea indefinitely. Eventually, he ended up in the city of Rome. And early traditions relate that Peter was in Rome, and Mark was his helper. And also, along with being a helper, would come the idea of being his amanuensis, in other words, his secretary, a person who would write down the things that Peter said. Now, sometimes you hear from atheists the claim that, well, most of the disciples, they couldn't even write, so how can they be the authors? Well, real easy. They hire a secretary, and the secretary takes the dictation. Just the same way that anybody who couldn't write would hire somebody to take down what I'm saying and send out a letter.
Right.
So
yeah. Not to cut you off. Can I share my screen real quick, Nick, so I could show people the website that was just recommended?
Don't you ever cut off James Snapp again. I'm just kidding. Yeah, share your screen. I don't care.
Okay, cool. All right, so people...
but I didn't even get an answer from him yet. You cut him off before he answered me.
I'm sorry about that.
I'll try to get back to that. I haven't forgotten.
I wanted to hear what you thought the earliest date was.
Yeah, so this is the website, everybody. It's New Rome Press, and how I found the Bible. They give you a couple options of what to look at. You just go to the products and you look up the scripture. And is this the one you were talking about?
Yes,
right.
It's the same one. Yes.
Okay. So there you are, people. If you do want to check it out and you do have some questions about that,
What is that? The EOB?
yeah, the EOB.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to check that out too. And
Yeah,
why?
I'm definitely gonna pick this up.
Why exactly, James, did you say that you think that's the most accurate translation that we have now? Sorry.
It's the most accurate in part because the translators have not resorted to the wild paraphrase, but only necessary paraphrase.
Right.
And also because it's thoroughly based on the Byzantine text. Now,
Okay.
I'm not saying that the Byzantine text is perfect. I don't think that. I think quite a few times when you see Jesus' name in the Gospels, you should, if you want the original text, you should have a reading that just says "he," with the word Jesus. Sometimes in the Byzantine text line, it was made to be read in churches, and in churches you wanted a text that you could understand. And so readings were introduced, readings that later became dominant in the text, that changed the wording, but not the meaning. So, in other words, the Byzantine priests, the Byzantines in their liturgy, did not think it objectionable to have a reading in the text that was read to people, for people to listen and hear the word. They didn't think it was objectionable to hear the word Jesus when in the original text, if you were a stickler for detail, the original text would not have the word Jesus, it would have the word he, but anybody could tell from the context it refers to Jesus, because when you're reading, you don't always get the context. Sometimes it was read piece by piece, lection by lection.
What do you say to a person like this who's filling up my comment section with comments like this? Can you read that?
It says King James is most accurate, and there are verses removed and replaced in all of the Bible translations.
Well, first he's calling you wrong. He says wrong. King James Version is the most accurate. There are verses removed and replaced in all other Bible translations. A lot of people actually believe what this guy's believing, so if you could try to answer, that would be cool.
And to an extent, he's right in most cases. If you look at in the book of Mark, chapter 11, we see this verse not there in some of the translations, English translations, that are based on the Alexandrian text. It's not really hard to see why that verse in Mark chapter 11, I think it's verse 26, is not there. It's because when you look at the verse before it, it ends with the same words that verse ends in. If somebody wants to just clarify that for me, am I talking about Mark 11:26 or 11:24?
I'm gonna look it up right now. You said it was Mark. To look at Mark.
Mark 11. Yeah. I've got a lot of stuff on my desk right now, so I won't even bother looking myself. But I think
a lot of people go and they say it's like intentional. I don't know if this guy's leaning in towards that camp, but what the comment he gave you, a lot of people are actually thinking it's like an intentional thing, that there's like some conspiracy to pollute the new versions out there, right? And the King James is the only God-given act.
It's not a pure accident on the part of the translators. The translators have adopted the Alexandrian text, the text in the form in which it was used in Egypt. Instead of using the text of Byzantium, which became dominant in Greek, they used
was that in the King James you wanted me to bring up, or was that a different translation you wanted me to bring up?
King James or New King James will do just fine.
Okay, so Mark 11:26, and I'm sharing my screen now.
I know, guys, it wouldn't be a Signs and Wonders show without a troll. Don't worry. Someone's like, Nick, bro, you always got to have a troll in here. It's like, yeah, that's how it goes.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, might have to zoom in a bit. There you go.
It's 26 right there.
Right here.
Yes. If you look in the text, and you can do this in Greek too, even better. But here you can get the idea. In verse 25, the verse ends with "Forgive you your trespasses." 26 ends in "Forgive you your trespasses." Now, if you were writing a copy of the Gospel of Mark by hand and lost your line of sight, you would come to this. You could pick up your pen here, do your writing, come back to it though here, with the same words in front of you.
Yeah, which happens all the time, especially back then. They're translating by candlelight, by hand. They didn't they put no spaces in between the words, right? Or letters, because they tried to maximize paper because it was super expensive.
Not really translating, but transcribing, just making a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
your line of sight could easily skip from the end of verse 25 to the end of verse 26, and because the sentence still is sensible, you would never realize your mistake.
Yeah, it's not like some intentional thing, and there's even proof that transcribers have made that mistake, right? I'm pretty sure I think I've seen James White. He was talking about some kind of, there was like proof in the manuscript evidence that people made that mistake where they got tired and their eyes have like jumped, and they can like see where the correction was done by the.
Yeah, again, everyone in the chat, James Snapp is saying that if you look at this in the Greek, it's something that just doesn't really make sense as a cohesive sentence, if I'm not mistaken, right? Something like that?
No, I'm saying that if a copyist made that mistake, he would never really realize it.
Okay.
And I have at my blog, the textofthegospels.com, if you just run a search for Mark 11:26, and I have a full explanation of how it went missing. It didn't go missing by a guy saying, I just don't think that Jesus should have said that. Let's take that out. And so he deliberately would took this out because this idea is restated emphatically in other books too, in Matthew, for instance. Mm-hmm. But it could easily go missing by accident without a nefarious villain in the picture, just a careless scribe who's just worked too hard, gotten too tired. For whatever reason, he makes this accident and he skips the verse. He's not being nefarious. He's just being fallible. In this case, he fails to include that verse, skipping from here to here. That mistake happens often enough that it has a name, parablepsis. And when it happens because of similar beginnings of words, it's homeoopton. In this case, homeoteliuton.
And what was the name of your blog, real quick, so I could pull it up so people could look at it, and they themselves can. You guys can go and you can read the explanation that he's giving.
The textofthegospels.com.
Okay.
Use the little search bar for Mark 11:26.
Okay, now, Sepp, back to my question, James. I want to know what you think when the earliest gospel was written. When do you think it was? Like how? Have you heard about that? One of the temple was still standing. So was it in Mark? I think
so it's right here, guys. Just saying.
Use the search bar on the top of the page for Mark 11:26, and you can go straight to what I was just saying about that passage.
The Text of the Gospels, a blog by James Snapp Jr. about the New Testament textual criticism. Well, let's put a link in the show. What's the website? Well, what's your website? I couldn't bring it up last time. What do you want me to link, bro? I want to help you out.
It's the textofthegospels.com.
I know, but is that what you want put in the video description, James? Or do you want yours?
That one would be fine, but also just Curtisville CC, and then go to the textual criticism resources. It's one of the buttons on the front page.
I'm going to go to Google Curtisville, Curtisville.
Yep. Curtisville CC.
CurtisvilleCC .cc.
CurtisvilleCC.com.
Okay. It didn't come up. Oh, there it is. James Snapp Jr. Okay, cool. I'm going to put this in the description, guys. This is James Snapp's website. There's your church, eh? That's not a bad, it's kind of a nice little church. How many people you guys get packed in there sometimes?
Not very many. Our congregation is mostly older and in the most vulnerable range for COVID-19.
Oh, yeah. I'd come to your church for sure. Okay, so I'm going to copy this website, and right now, guys, I'm going to put it in the description of the video, so please check out his website if you want to learn more.
Yeah. Now back to your question, Nick, about when were the Gospels written. This was a question that one of Tischendorf's most famous writings had a very similar title to that question. And I would say Mark was the first person to write a gospel that was in the form of Peter's recollections about Jesus. That doesn't mean that Mark just had the one form, because as he's taking notes from what Peter says, as some other researchers have pointed out in the past, that preachers tend to get a little... The sermons tend to be longer the older the preacher is. And so as Peter wants to say, well, let me tell you about this. 1 year, 5 years later, he might say, let me tell you about this. And he's already told the story, 5 times, but then he'll recall, there's this other little detail about that I want to add in there. And so we have maybe a very concisely worded gospel, but then as time goes by, Peter might find more things to convey as he continues to preach about Jesus. So Mark's notes would be the basis for a good part of the Gospels, and so that's one what we would call, if we were to delve into a higher criticism, I would say that one thing to look at would be Mark's collection of writings about Jesus. But that collection might be shorter when Peter first gets to Rome. It might be longer after Peter's been there in Rome a while longer. And Mark has this collection, but it's a growing collection.
Right.
So that's one source to look at.
So,
also, in the writings of a guy named Papias, or Papias, he mentions that Matthew wrote down the sayings of the Lord in Hebrew or in Aramaic. And so one source could be, I would say, is deduced to be the source that records Jesus' sayings. Not necessarily all the narrative that goes with it, but if anybody were to be a literate disciple among the 12 disciples, Matthew would be a top contender. He would be literate because he's already a tax collector. He's got to be able to keep track of things. And that would be a record that is very much like what we see in Matthew. Once the narrative breaks off and it's Jesus speaking, you can say that you can look into Matthew and say, "Oh, I see these big chunks." I mean, you also have small statements too, but there's distinctly big chunks. And if you look at Plummer's commentary, Plummer was a scholar from like the year 1900 or so, and he emphasizes this point that Jesus' sayings in Matthew, it looks like, just the way Moses wrote 5 books of the law. In Matthew seems to present Jesus as the new lawgiver, but it's just a simple matter of how he organizes the sayings of Jesus. You see a big chunk here, a chunk here, a chunk here, a chunk here, a chunk here. 5 big chunks, besides the little things here and there.
So what year do you personally think the earliest gospel is written?
Oh, I'll get there.
Okay.
Then we have Luke.
Hey, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Luke seems to be using a form, an earlier rather than later form of Mark's notes. Not the full gospel, but things that are very similar to what we see in the Gospel of Mark. There are literal similarities that implies a literary source. So Luke has Mark's collection about Peter's remembrance of Jesus, and he also seems to have a translation of Matthew's book of Jesus' sayings. Then we have the Gospel of Matthew itself, which uses, essentially the Gospel of Mark. Not in every detail, but it's got to be toward the later end rather than the front end of Mark's notes of Peter's recollections about Jesus. So that's Matthew. And then you have Luke doing the same thing, but he's using a translation of the Logia, in a Greek translation, also using Mark's collection of Peter's remembrances. So you kind of have a combination where the narrative and the sayings combine. That's what we have in Matthew, and that's what we have in Luke. Luke using an earlier form of Mark's recollections about Jesus, and Matthew using a later form. But if you want, in general terms, Mark does the work of actually having the text of Peter's recollections written down. That doesn't mean it's in one stable form. It's in a mutating, growing form. But that text is already there when Peter's in Rome in the 60s. Now Luke, when he writes his gospel, it's the first part of a 2-part collection of books, the second one being the book of Acts. When we look at Acts and how Acts ends, it kind of ends as if Luke's waiting to hear about a trial and about a verdict that Paul is going to have.
So that's like 27 years after Jesus died. Then, about
that's
you said Mark?
Around the year 62, Luke writes the Gospel of Luke.
Okay. You were talking about Mark, right?
Mark is having the basic skeletal work of the Gospel of Mark.
The one that you said was written in the 60s was Mark, you think?
I would say that Mark already had in the 60s the basic patchwork form of what became the Gospel of Mark. But like I said, it's a mutating book. The more Peter preaches, each time Peter preaches, it gets a little thicker. Different details are stressed.
Plus, there's a lot of different people have different opinions, right? So it's not like.
Oh yes, when it comes to what's called the synaptic problem, by synaptic problem, we don't mean problem like, oh wow, this is a terrible thing. It's like trying to untie a large, complicated knot. In some respects, it is, but it's not a problem like, oh, those two are having problems. It's not that kind of problem. It's simply a literary question of what is the literary relationship of these these three books, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, being the synoptic gospels, the ones that focus on the same events, that see things, that report the same things. So there's Mark, whose writings were used by Matthew and Luke. But as far as the Gospel of Mark in the form in which it's been handed down, I would say that isn't produced until about the time when Peter dies. I'd say the mid 60s. Luke can be earlier than Mark in terms of date, but still be still come after Mark in terms of which gospel depends upon the other, or at least in terms of the other writers, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I would picture the skeletal work of Mark, which was not a fixed text, but a growing text.
Hey man, before you go, we had someone in here yesterday for hours, and he was like trying to prove his points using Gnostic Gospels. Like, what do you know about the Gnostic Gospels and the whole Gnostic religion? Anything?
We'll never get back to this question if we start looking into that.
Okay.
Let me finish up the synoptic problem.
Oh, I didn't know you were. I didn't know you weren't finished. Sorry.
So I would say Mark is still writing the remembrances of Peter right up to the point where Peter dies and can't have any more to add. When he doesn't have any more to add, there's no point in continuing to keep the gospel, to keep Peter's recollections, his memoirs, to keep them unstable. And so Mark stabilizes it, and the Gospel of Mark is released in the mid 600s. So Luke, using material from Mark that's just as a source material, makes the Gospel of Luke. Later on, Matthew, also using Mark, but a longer form of it, and it's not always going to be the Gospel of Mark until it's finalized. But something very much like the Gospel of Mark is used by Matthew. And Matthew's writing probably about the time of the destruction of the temple, about 70. In fact, the first Jewish revolt might have still been going on when Matthew was writing.
Yeah, people try to put later dates on it for some reason. I don't know why.
Now, as far as John is not part of the synoptic problem. I would assign the Gospel of John to about the year 90.
90, eh? Yeah, that's crazy.
Huh. And I think if you look at some of the early traditions, some of the traditions are stronger than others. Some of them are even mentioned in some of those Gnostic Gospels. But that's my general approach. As far as insisting on earlier dates, I think the more you try to press those cases, the more speculative it becomes. But Stephen Carlson, who I think is in Australia right now, has a webpage about the synoptic problem that explores it pretty thoroughly. He presents at least 5 or 6 different proposed solutions that various scholars have come up with over the years. One problem with the simple solution is what's called minor disagreements. The simple solution to the synoptic problem is Mark writes first, Matthew makes the sayings, Luke uses Mark and a third source that is also used by, which is not carried on by Mark. It's called
Set feedback.
Yep.
But it's what's called what you can discern from a triple tradition and then unique sources to Matthew and Luke, and then sources or a source that is shared by Matthew and Luke. So once these variables are isolated, then you can get to a limited number of possibilities for how they can be put together. And like I said, the simple solution involves the 4-document hypothesis. And again, on Carlson's site, this is explained in detail. And the idea is that, well, Mark's first, then comes Luke and Matthew, and there's a source that's shared by Matthew and Luke besides Mark. The problem with that is sometimes there are what's called minor disagreements. Sometimes Matthew and Luke will be agreeing with each other, and they'll be in the same episode of the same pericope that Mark also tells about. Yeah. And yet, if they're depending on Mark, how is it that Mark says something different than Matthew and Luke, who are supposed to be dependent on him?
I just seen something funny in the chat. This person's like, Jubilees and Enoch 1 are inspired, vetted scripture. They were taken out of the canon by Satan. Why to confuse? And then right below, Melvin's like, exactly. Good old Melvin.
Well,
exactly.
I think he got you there.
I love you, Melvin.
Hey, so Mr. Snapp, I did want to just ask too, like, exactly how long have you been studying and perfecting your craft with the textual the textual side of it?
I think I first got interested in looking into textual criticism intently way back in 1986.
Okay.
Yeah, man, you know a lot. I was gonna say, like, where do you get all this? Like, it's crazy, man. Like, I wish I could. Have you
wishes don't come true, Nick?
Have you went and seen like actual documents that are really old, James?
I usually don't bother going to museums or spending the money to like fly to Ireland and
yeah, I guess everything's
to the Bodleian, but many manuscripts in libraries nowadays put page views of their manuscripts online. And they're again at curtisvillecc.com, and among the textual critical resources, I include links accessible at the touch of a button to some of the most extensive manuscript collections. The Vatican has a large collection. At the Library of Congress, there's a very many microfilm pictures of manuscripts that are kept at the Monastery of St. Catherine's on Mount Sinai. Now, obviously, a microfilm from 1950 is not going to be as eye-catching as a digital photograph made 5 years ago. But
right.
For the purpose of just reading the text and seeing it, they're still a lot more accurate than you might expect. Of course, there are also some manuscripts that are basically melted, and those images are not really worth anything because you need different tools to analyze those manuscripts to an extent. But you still have access to hundreds of manuscripts online at the touch of a button if you want to go see them.
Yeah, they like a while ago they did the entire Codex Sinaiticus, uploaded like every picture, every page of it.
Yes, one unfortunate thing about that is when they made the Codex Sinaiticus website, they also presented a translation, or what they presented as if it was a translation. But that translation that's there on the website to this day does not really accurately translate the actual text of Codex Sinaiticus. It's a more or less a pseudo translation to a large extent that was made back in like 1870, and it's not accurate. It's missing lots of the most distinctive readings of Codex Sinaiticus.
It's got though. It's still
the website itself is useful.
CodexSinaiticus.org, is that the website, or is there a different?
Yeah, that's the website.
I think it's this.
No, that's it.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's
you pulled it up. You want to share that real quick?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up. Yeah. This is the one. Hey, James.
That's it. Most definitely. Be careful not to put too much of it because you might get a copyright strike.
Oh, really? It's copywritten?
I've never tested it.
Well, let's not test it right now. then,
That's
I guess.
crazy. Don't they have like the original pictures of it uploaded on here?
Yes, just go to that button that I'm pointing at.
Hold on, I don't see where you're pointing. Are you sharing your screen, James? This is me sharing my
Okay,
screen.
I can see it, but you can't see it. That's right.
Manuscript.
Just click on the main title right there. It'll take a little bit to load.
Oh yeah, that's cool, man.
Okay.
Oh,
Now
man.
this is just a fragment, but if you go forward a few more pages, you'll see nice looking pages.
Yeah, they do got some nice pages in here.
You just look for the Gospel of Matthew and you'll see a full page.
Oh, there's a pretty nice one, eh?
And so. It's still heavily damaged.
Okay, where do I? Oh, this is Genesis. Okay, I'll go to Matthew.
Yeah. You have to click the little down arrow.
Oh, this is really cool.
Yeah, bro. They did this a few years ago. They uploaded the entire. This thing was written in the 4th century. It's the oldest complete Bible that we know of in history. It was written in like the year 350 or something. It's a complete.
Nick, I'm gonna take a break. I'll be right back.
Okay, bro.
Sure.
Check that out, man. That right there is like 1650 years old, that piece of paper you're looking at.
Man.
Yeah. This is all the original. This is the entire New Testament. 4th century complete Bible. Yeah, the Codex Sinaiticus. Pretty amazing, actually. No, it's not the Dead Sea Scrolls, Landor. This is the Codex Sinaiticus. It's the oldest complete New Testament Bible that we have, that we know of anyway. It's, like I said, it was probably written in like 360, 350 AD and compiled. Before then, everything was like on scrolls and stuff, and it was really hard to pull out, right?
Yeah, these are actual pictures of the papers themselves. This isn't.
Yeah. These are actual pictures of like the 1650-year-old pieces of paper. Anyone go check this out. It's codexsinaiticus.org. I've seen a documentary of how they did it. They took the actual Bible and they carefully opened it up, and they had this like big, nice camera, and they like made sure it wasn't going to damage it before they took the pictures. And they like very carefully just photographed with a nice camera every single picture and fragment and everything of the entire Codex Sinaiticus.
Yes.
So,
and Nick, besides this website, codexsinaiticus.org,
yeah.
codexsinaiticus.org shows you one manuscript. And even though it's the oldest complete manuscript, because in Codex Vaticanus, although Codex Vaticanus is older, Sinaiticus is old enough to have the Eusebian canons, which Vaticanus doesn't have. It has a different division system in the Gospels.
Wow, look at this one. This one's beautiful. Look how crisp and clean this is. If you knew how to read Koine Greek, you could read this.
Yeah, in a magistrate or unsealed text. Yeah, and most manuscripts that have unless they've been under duress for a while are pretty well taken care of.
This is amazing, though. This is from the 4th century. Like, this is like what, 1600 and something years old.
Yeah, I wouldn't get blown away by the age, because even though it's that old, its text has lots of mistakes.
I know, but I'm not talking about that. I just love history, and I think it's amazing that we have something that old that's this well preserved. I'm not talking about what the actual scripture says, but there's a lot of mistakes in there, eh?
There are. Milne and Skeet, when they analyzed it, and one of them, the person writing this particular chapter of their book, said it's hard to believe how many ways that one of the scribes found to make mistakes. There are so many inexplicable mistakes in it. But one of the reasons why there are mistakes, I think, is because it was not a one-person venture. I think that what's implied by some of the pieces of this is that one scribe who was not very good, was not very experienced at being a scribe. I think that's the scribe that made the main text in the New Testament. There was another scribe that was all along planned to be the proofreader.
Malvin, sorry, I'm sorry to cut you off, but something caught me in the chat here. Malvin, do you now believe that there are no nuclear weapons in the world? Are you on that one now too? That's because it's crazy. I'm sorry. You guys know Melvin, right? He's on the show all the time. But is that what you're saying, Melvin? That there's no nuclear bombs now? Because that's an old conspiracy that's been going around for a while, that's saying nuclear weapons don't exist and it's all fake and like the government's lying and like.
Dude, I find that kind of offensive, man, because like I have family that's over in Japan.
Yeah, they say Japan just got firebombed and like there was no nukes or anything.
Like to this day, there's parts of Hiroshima that cannot be inhabited, and the pigs, like the wild boars that are over there, you can't even eat them or burn them because of the radiation.
I said it once and I said it again. Melvin believes like pretty much any conspiracy he sees on YouTube. It's
sorry about that, James. Sometimes you get caught up in some rabbit holes.
Sometimes I get caught up in the chat there, brother. Sorry.
Okay. Well, getting back to Codex Sinaiticus, even though it is one of the oldest manuscripts, the world's oldest Bible, as some British library publications have called it, that doesn't make its text accurately translated. But what you have here is, I think, one person making the main text who's not too concerned to be accurate, because he knows that the accurate person, the proofreader, is going to come along after him and correct his mistakes. So he's not really highly motivated to be very, very careful. Every now and then in the text, you'll see on some pages that we don't see. On some pages, the main scribe made a mistake so bad that his work was just thrown out. We don't have the original pages at that point. The proofreader had to correct the very bad mistake in the pages that he was proofreading. And as a proofreader, he rewrote all 4 of the pages that he was throwing out and put in the new corrected pages. We see that, for instance, in Codex Sinaiticus at the end of the Gospel of Mark and the beginning of the Gospel of Luke. Those 4 pages are not the original pages, except in terms of how was the manuscript released from the monastery, how was it released from the scriptorium? How was it released from the center, the manuscript making center that it came from? In that form, these were the original pages, but it's not the work of the main copyist. The proofreader was responsible for those 4 pages, and that happens more than once in the New Testament. Unfortunately, in the textual apparatus of Nestle Island, there's no notification to tell the readers that we're looking at replacement pages at those points. There probably should be. But if you're impressed by seeing one manuscript, if you go to the website of the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, you can see dozens and dozens of New Testament manuscripts. CSNTM, at their website, they have a large collection.
I was trying to go to that website. What's it called, James?
CSNTM.
CSM.
Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. Just take the first letters.
Center for the Study?
No, not the word for. Just Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. CS.
Yeah. CSNM. Oh.
CSNTM.
Oh, CSNTM.
Yes.
Oh, there it is. CSNTM manuscripts. CSNTM.org.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'll share this and then
use those.
I got to get going in like 10 minutes, James. You probably want to get going too. It's been almost 2 hours. So thank you so much for being here for so long. But we'll bring this up and let you have a few more minutes to talk if you'd like.
But if you go to that website and just search a little bit, and you'll find the list of manuscripts.
So like here we go.
Yeah, that's where it begins. Just scroll down from there, and you'll find them by the dozens.
Wow, look at 2nd or 3rd century. Second century papyrus. Yes. That's like as old as it gets, right?
I think that particular one.
Wow.
That particular one, I think, is an Old Testament manuscript, but many of the others are New Testament manuscripts. Then you can't get much earlier. I think if you look down to 52, you'll find it.
That's from the 2nd century, so the year 100 something. That's so old. There's nothing. They don't have anything like that in antiquity for any religion in history that goes back that close, and all the wealth that we have of manuscript evidence. It's amazing. It really is.
But you can probably find a Papyrus 46 on there.
P46?
Yeah. Just click back and scroll down a little bit more.
Or what about P52? I should just type
here, I think.
Probably is.
Scroll down. First you have some Old Testament manuscripts, not all, but some.
I just typed in P52. I'm going to see if it comes up. Searching.
You might get it faster just scrolling down.
Yeah, it takes a while to search. There must be a lot of manuscripts cataloged in this website, man.
There's about 2,000.
There it is. P52 papyrus, 2nd century.
Let's click on view over there.
You said there was 2,000 manuscripts on this?
Yeah,
about 2,000. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
2nd century manuscript of the Gospels on papyrus, 1 fragment, single column, approximately 18 lines per column.
Just click on view and it'll show you the picture.
This is like the money fragment. This is the one that talks. So it's written. Isn't this the one that talks about Pontius Pilate?
Yes, this is the one with John 17 through 18. I think it even includes the exact verse numbers there.
Oh man,
John 18:31 and John 18:37. So incredible. Let's read those.
And this papyrus gets a lot of press. Now, Papyrus 104 is not as famous, but it could very well be just as old as this one.
John 18:31 says, "You take him and judge him by." I'm just bringing up the first version that comes up here. So John 18:31 says, Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." Then Jews said to him, "It's not lawful for us to put anyone to death." So we have that from like the year 100 and something written on papyrus to back up the New Testament. And then we also have 37, which says, "Then Pilate said to him, 'So you are a king?' Jesus answered, 'You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Man, we have that written down on ancient papyrus. That's so cool, man.
Now, as you can see, it's a pretty small fragment. So as something to use in textual analysis, it doesn't have that much of an impact.
That's what I'd like to say to all the Hebrew Israelites in the chat right now that claim that the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew. Please show me some evidence like this, dude. We have like every single manuscript like that we can pretty much find like cataloged on the internet for you to look at yourself. It's written in Koine Greek. Like the New Testament was not originally written in Hebrew, not that we know of, right, James? Like we don't have any evidence for that, do we?
Well, we have some evidence that could very well have been a copy in Aramaic of that source material that we mentioned when we were talking about the synoptic problem. The idea is that Matthew wrote down the sayings of Jesus and preserved that in Greek, and then later on that was used in the production of the text of the Gospels.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is the New Testament was written in Greek originally. As if I'm wrong, maybe, I don't know. But
when the Gospel of Matthew itself, not the source materials, but when the Gospel of Matthew was released, it was released in Greek. Because and again, that's part of what's implied, but that's the literary relationship that I was referring to earlier. That whatever Mark is written in, the other Gospels that use Mark use Markan material. That's what they're going to be in.
Plus, look at all these manuscripts we have, like from the year 100s, that are all written in Koine Greek. Like it kind of substantiates what, you know what I mean? Like where are all these ancient Hebrew manuscripts of the New Testament? We have thousands and thousands and thousands of manuscripts that are written in Koine Greek, but I don't see any early Hebrew New Testament manuscripts like this. So if I did, then maybe.
Now keep in mind, most of the manuscripts that you'll see in museums and libraries on display and lists like we see here at CSNDM, most of those are much later. But we do have the papyrus that you see like this one from the 100s, 200s, 300s, and some more later on.
What was the other one that you said that wasn't as famous, but you wanted me to?
Papyrus 104 is not nearly as famous as Papyrus 52, but probably has just as good a claim when it comes to, is this the earliest manuscript of the New Testament materials?
There it is. P104, 2nd century manuscript of the Gospels, 1 fragment, single column, 31 lines per column. It's got more than the P52, eh?
Yeah, there's quite a bit more material. It's still just a fragment, But
Yeah, for sure. It's old, right?
It's very old. You can see
Like 2,000 years old. It's crazy.
almost.
Matthew 21:34 and Matthew 21:43. I want to bring that up real quick, and then we'll get going here because I do got to get going here.
But also, if you were to look at the Goodspeed manuscript collection at the University of Chicago, that doesn't have nearly as many manuscripts as the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscript, but it's a very nice collection, and it was really one of the websites that innovated the idea of people saying, why don't we just put the page views online for free? The Goodspeed manuscript collection should be applauded for taking that step. I don't know if they were the first one. I think a monastery, the Limehouse Monastery, might have been the very first one.
Yeah, so I don't think you can copyright this stuff. It's like, this is like history. They put it on here for free, right? Like these are manuscript finds. It's not like a translation.
The Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts has to get permission from the custodians of each manuscript they display. From the library that they take the images at. So it can vary from one manuscript to another. For instance, with the manuscripts that are on microfilm from the Library of Congress, I don't think nobody cares. They're pretty much public domain. But in every case, I would say we should double check, because the Center for the Study of Manuscripts has to be limited in some cases, not in all, but in some cases they're limited by the restraints that the custodian agency, whatever library is out there, whatever museum is out there, whatever restrictions they agree to have the manuscript images released, we have to kind of echo their example. And there are details there in the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscript. So you might see an image and you say, oh, this is really cool. But if you get it at the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, you'd better double check, because I think that they're obligated to only release to the extent that the agency that they've worked with allows them to.
This one's not as famous because it's just kind of like not as exciting of a story. It's just like, when the season for fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. That's all that one says. And then
it was important to me, man.
And then it was Matthew 21:43. That was on the manuscript too. What was that one say? P52 is like a really cool story. It's like, it's got like, you say that I am the truth. What is the truth? Like, it's awesome.
Yeah.
But P104 is probably a more important textual witness than P52 is, because it involves a significant textual variant. But
21:43 says, therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to people producing its fruits. That's kind of cool. Textual variant, what, James?
P104 attests to a particular textual variant where a verse that is usually there is not there in this witness, or appears not to be there. There's some wiggle room with interpreting the evidence. If you witness against what is both a dominant witness in the Byzantine text, but also what's a dominant witness in the Alexandrian text, and yet at the same time, it's not in this earlier witness from the. It's a papyrus that attests to the omission, or apparently it attests to the omission, and so P104 is, even though it's not as famous as P52, as a textual witness, it's much more interesting for that reason. But to get it more into detail, we might be starting to go into the high grass.
But for sure, bro.
The Goodspeed manuscript collection at the University of Chicago put their manuscripts online, I think, almost before any other one. Definitely before the Vatican did.
Hey, J-Man has been trying to connect for like an hour. Like, J-Man, do you have anything to say? Do you have anything to say before James goes? Because I got to get going here soon too. Is your connection good now? Do you want to ask him something before we go? He has connection problems. He's been trying to connect to the show for like an hour. There he is. Are you there, J-Man?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. I wasn't sure if y'all could hear me. I don't have much to say, man. Honestly, I agree with everything James Snapp says. Hey, James Snapp, my name is J-Man. I don't know if you've ever have you ever heard of the Hebrew Israelite movement?
I'm aware of it. I don't have anybody nearby. I think that advocates it.
Okay. Well, I'm actually a Christian apologist, and mainly I teach about what they teach about, but how to refute it is basically what I teach. And so I've been coming on Nick's show, and we've been talking about a little bit of what they believe and what they teach.
Yeah, he's
And
been a
so
big help.
actually,
He's been a big help, actually,
and
there, James. He's pretty knowledgeable when it comes to that kind of stuff about the BHI for sure.
And so like everything that you said is like everything I agree with. Like I mean, you're not a King James onlyist, right?
No, he's not.
Definitely not.
We just talked about it
Okay.
for a while. I guess we have to fix some rules.
He
Yeah,
is.
my
Don't quote me on that. No.
He doesn't have a problem with the King James. I don't think he like hates it or anything. He's just not a King James onlyist.
yeah, I mean, I'm not one either. I was just wondering.
Yeah.
I mean, I do use it though. I do use it because that is their main version that they use.
Yeah,
So
that's what
that's
the Hebrews.
the reason
Yeah.
why I do that. But anyways, I really liked it. Like I said, I honestly I totally agree with everything that you said. So I mean, there's no objection in my mind. So yeah.
Well, thanks for
So that's
hanging
it.
out, J-Man. Thanks for hanging out. And hey, if you and Sep want to stay on after I shut down the show, we can quickly have like a 2-minute talk about that coming up episode before I go. Now seeing how we're all together. Is that cool?
That's fine.
Okay, cool. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming on and for watching. James, thank you so much for giving us over 2 hours of your time, brother. You're welcome back anytime. I want to have you back again. So we'll figure out a topic and try and book you on again if that's cool. You're one of my favorite guests. So thank you so much, bro. Would you like to close in a prayer? Say anything before you go, James?
Sure. First, I don't think we really covered adequately the differences between the Byzantine text and the Alexandrian text. But maybe we can look into that another time.
That's a really good idea for a future show topic. Yeah, I'll set that up.
Yeah. So right before you do go, Mr. Snap, I just did want to say thank you. You know, because there's a lot of people that they have a knowledge, right, of the Bible, and they seem to want to profit off of it. And I do personally thank you for your time. You just coming here and helping us understand.
And guys, like, we're not saying James is like a guru or anything like that. You guys can go double check anything James has to say and verify it for yourself. We're not like worshiping him, but he does really know what he's talking about. So yeah, I left a link to James's website in the description, you guys. So please go check out what he does. Go check out what he's about. Go research what he's told you tonight, and you'll see, right? But yeah, James, you're always the one that closes in prayer, and I would love to set up a future show about Byzantine and what is the difference between the Byzantine and the Alexandrian manuscripts. I'm very interested in that myself, so I'll email you about that soon. Okay, buddy, and we'll set that up. So yeah, go ahead and close in a prayer for us, James.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the promises that you've given us in your word. We thank you that we have your word because you are the faithful witness. Your Son is the faithful witness. And Lord, even as he described one of his servants, Antipas, as a faithful witness, Lord, help us to look into your word, to seek its truth, and not only to appreciate its meaning, but Lord, impel us to live by it, to express it, Lord, so those around us can see our faith. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. I'm going to get a hold of you soon about the manuscript show. Thank you so much for coming on, and you have a good night, okay? God bless you and your family, James.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye.
Likewise to you.
See you, bro. Thank you guys for coming, everybody in the chat, even the trolls. I love you there, Melvin. You're always keeping the chat lively, aren't you, brother? Okay, so thank you, Kanika. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Make sure you come to the next show and like and subscribe. And God bless you guys. Have a